What's it?
Alright, it's going to be 6 off and then on case, specifically on case. Solvency first, and then if time remains, it's going to be stability and insurgency.
Is it 6?
Yes.
Alright, you can get ready. I'm sorry, I missed that real quick. What was it?
6 off, and then on case, first is solvency, then if time remains, stability and insurgency.
Okay. 6 off.
It's going to be sick right here, guys.
Alright, I'm ready.
Alright, yell at me at the wind clear.
Alright.
Thank you. Ready? A, the affirmative they also specify that what actor whether used with the U.S. federal government enacts the plan and how it's enacted be the subpoint that's bad the person destroys education because we don't hear about how the plan is implemented, and implementation is 90% of the policy, no more than 80. Decision about self-executing analysis of the policy matters very little of the mechanism of implementing the choices are poorly understood, what percentage of the work is achieving the desired goal of the governmental actions to some of the preferred analytic alternative to identify that in the normal case. It's about 10% leaving the remaining 90% in the realm of implementation. Second, we lose 90% of our ground because like agent counterplans and decisive enforcement because arguments they could shift out of the different agents within the federal government if we try to get a link there. The damage has already been done because we couldn't run arguments for fear of a moving target. The first negative circumstantial strategy for the rest of the round, we can never get it back. Fourth, using the whole federal government makes the whole make them multiple active fiat because there are hundreds of different agencies within the whole USFG. That's bad because it's not real world or reachable. They can't solve because there's no such thing as monolithic federal government as they assume all their authors are talking about. But the same actor with are talking about the same actor within it, which they don't use, so they can't claim solvency. See, these are all independent reasons to vote negative. Next, A is the interpretation. Constructive engagement means quid pro quo. China and Cuba proof. Constructive engagement means carrots and sticks. Smith and 92. Constructive engagement means using carrots and sticks to encourage foreign governments to get to the desired direction. Removal of the carrots and applying the sticks unless we apply them to our policy. It's one-sided and encourage wrongdoing. This is the key to the creation of the climate and the peaceful change. Unfortunately, the administration needs to determine to avoid anything other than subtle carrots and sticks. Be the violation of the plan gives unconditional assistance and the guarantee. See the standards. One is predictable ground. We lose specific unconditional bids under pressure-based dissents and solve the arguments about conditions. We also lose the terms of the links based off that conditioning. To this limit, they overload the topic. They can give an assistance in the guarantee they want. Quick limits the app by forcing them to find evidence on what conditions the country will engage them and agree on. Then 3, it's key to specific topic education. We learn more about the topic in the negotiation process under what conditions the U.S. will make in order to get what it wants. Also, we learn about under what conditions that certain countries will act under. And 4, their effects they don't actually directly do constructive engagement. It's voter preparedness and education. Next. A is the interpretation of the security guarantees to protect another country from information, material, personal activities, and installations that are protected against espionage, sabotage, subversion, and terrorism, as well as against the loss of unauthorized disclosure. This is the DoD dictionary of military term. Security is the condition to achieve when the designated information, material, personal activities, and installations are protected under the, against espionage, subversion, and terrorism, as well as the loss against unauthorized disclosure. And the guarantee is the promise to pay another debt to fulfill the contract obligation to pay or perform law.com, and be the violation. The affirmative fails to meet all the conditions within the security guarantee, which means or fails to assume the contextual obligations within the country. And see the standards. One is education. Our interpretation forces a more in-depth debate about the components of what make up a security guarantee and how they're protected specific threats like espionage and terrorism. 2 is Brightline. We have the most objective Brightline because ours is the least contextual. Our definitions come from the law and military dictionaries. If either you follow what is a security guarantee or you don't. And 3 is limits. We ensure with paramount and predictable limits within the in case of the affirmative and for an in-depth debate. And this is about preparedness and education. Next off. Is the uniqueness of U.S. relations with Egypt are at a crossroad. Which are key to the Middle East. Current U.S. action to determine the nature of the relations within Egypt for years to come. If the United States enters Egypt now, there's no going back. Ali 06. The U.S.-Egypt strategic alliance, crucial for taking land in the Middle East, it is now at a vulnerable state, critical stage, and many factors are undermining the strategic partnership. We are now at the crossroads. U.S.-Egypt relationships can either be left to be deteriorated or for chaos instability, or political will can be mustered, and be the link is independently. Egypt will view the plan as imperialist, destroying all relations. Ali 06. In Egypt, there are doubts about the legitimacy of American behavior in the world. American interventions in Afghanistan are perceived to be as an attempt to stabilize the troubled world, but as a work of imperialists trying to change the world and according to its own image, manipulate the nations to the service of their own sinister interests and interface of business sovereign states. And the impact one is the good relations between the United States and Egypt are critical to the protection of U.S. dominance and influence not only in the Middle East but also throughout the rest of the world. Relations are vital to U.S. interests. Ali 06. Egypt not only provides the essential political and diplomatic support with the Arab Muslim world, but also has emerged as an important military partner guarding the stability of the Middle East. Egypt's strategic position is greater than the Middle East. They have a crucial role in the protection of the U.S. military force in Afghanistan and the Persian Gulf. The relationship with Egypt is thus key to the component of the U.S. power in the region and the vital to American interests, such as fighting global terrorism and protecting energy security, and it will continue to be the stake for a long time to come. And the impact of global nuclear war, Cal's at 95. U.S. leadership would preclude the rise of another global rival, enabling the world to avoid another global hot war, which the intent is to danger, including a global nuclear exchange, U.S. leadership would be more conducive to global stability than a multipolar system. And next off. Is the uniqueness, the UN protectionism is on the rise, however Bush is holding it off. This is Guardian 1219. Bush attempts to head off the legislative and the Congress to pressure China and move towards the market-based exchange rate. It is important to keep this relationship on even keel. Bush is already pursuing the negotiations over China's currency. Congress appears to be determined to pass additional legislation with the Bush for new tools to pressure China to make it easier for U.S. companies to relieve against cheaper Chinese imports. Although Bush has been fighting those bills off. And next. Foreign aid costs political capital. Lancaster in 2000. The view of the part of the most presidential political advisors given the perceived public hostility on foreign aid, paying attention to the aid will carry political cost, and the political capital is key to stopping terrorists. AFX News 05. China may have to give the U.S. concession to avoid Washington imposing sanctions against it. China faces a problem because Bush has diminished the political capital, dealing with increasingly protectionist Congress, and threatening China push them to stop investing in the pullout, which will cause a total economic collapse. I'll get 05. China has immense power to trade if it stops doing what it's doing now. The Chinese government will easily trigger an economic earthquake. It's running a huge trade surplus. China could do well to stop it. Besides this, if the dollar falls sharply, U.S. interest in the rise and the housing bubble burst, and they would stop American economy and the locomotive in the world in its tracks. Now China is facing a nexus and keeping the global recovery going, and the impact is nuclear war in 92. If the global economy stagnates, we will face a new period of international conflict, south against north, rich against poor. Russia, China, India, and all these countries with billions of people and the nuclear weapons would pose much greater danger to the world in order than Germany and Japan did in the 30s. And next off. International relations are inherently gender biased and create a masculine system of realism determines what is noble and worthy of consideration. Science 98. Gender bias in IR runs much deeper than the male-identified roles in the model state actor. The international relations are understood as there is relations between them. And the state is both actor and knowing subject. The series of marginalized, displaced others. The perspective of the socially constructed masculine and the experience of the epistemology validated and imposed on those women. Preserving the knowledge of the social practices and the structures that enable the men to consider their own experiences and human experience by explicitly ignoring the gender while implicitly exploiting the distinctly masculine meaning of the knowledge and seeking these epistemology in order to mask their own biases. And war and oppression, war, violence, and oppression of root forms are all root from the system of patriarchal domination. Signed in 98. War part of a woman's daily existence, but war, violence, and women's oppression all grow from the same root. Military institutions, states are inseparable from the patriarchy. War is not that it is a realist, as a realist whole, rooted in the nature of the man and the anarchies in the international realm. Patriarchal society have an inherent proclivity towards war because the supreme value is placed in control. And next. Our alternative is to incorporate a gender-conscious lens into the international relations. This challenges traditional international relations and creates a focus on individual security. Peterson and Ryan in 99. Politics is about how such power relations are structured, created, and sustained and reconfigured. Recognition of the gender inequality and the global phenomenon and the global and the local implications of the challenges and traditional definitions of IR. It also highlights the inequality and the significant source of the conflict in the international relations. In addition, but it also in the tensions with the notions about the inevitable clash of the states and the differing ideologies and interests. Where as the leaders of the next off.
On case.
On case.
Yeah.
All right.
Isn't that on case? Or again, one more.
Okay, sorry. First is the text. The United States will stop airstrikes in Afghanistan and should convince NATO to stop airstrikes too. First is competition. The AF only used the U.S. Adding NATO would make the perm separate because it wasn't in the 1AC, and that would be an independent voting issue for fairness. And two, they conceded in cross-text that NATO also does strikes, gutting all their solvency, and severing out would be another voter. Only the counterplan accesses the AF solvency and use it because U.S. and NATO both have to stop airstrikes. So the counterplan is key. Go on beyond case. Solvency. First, your blend doesn't meet the needs. Your own solvency advocates highlight several points on your offense. A, you don't expand the ISF. Ruben 06. What has gone badly is wrong with the international actors invested in the private security for Afghanistan. People point out examining the international security assistance force and there.
Do you have any terms?
Okay. Go to insurgency. Sorry. Turn plan bogs down the U.S. forces and increases insurgency. L9 in 07. And in Afghanistan, the mission creep has taken a slightly different form. Although the government will remove the continued presence of Afghanistan, the U.S. forces and the NATO, the nation building of the Taliban reinsurgence against the foreign occupiers.
Next questions.
Okay.
Let's do it from the top. Sure. You're in the first card and this.
Traffic timer. Traffic.
Oh, what's your status of your time planning routine? This was We'll make it traditional.
Both of them?
Yeah.
Okay. Could you give me just like a line by line of all the different off? Like I just didn't flow properly. You could just go through your the offs and just give me like the quickly. This is what this is saying. This is what that's saying.
The first one was
Very new.
A-spec, that you didn't specify your agent, which is bad for the standards of the game. The second one was